Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad the discussion is a little less contentious now than it was earlier, but I would point out to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who chose to impugn motives for people on this side of the aisle that perhaps if there was not a bailout fund in the House bill or a bailout fund in the Senate bill, perhaps people would not be confused about the ultimate purpose of those funds. Perhaps those funds, with the best of intentions, are perhaps designed to ensure that no taxpayer funds are used, but unfortunately, some of the people who designed them are the very same people who told us that Fannie and Freddie would never have a taxpayer bailout. We see what has happened there. Chairman Shapiro, my first question is for you. I understand many of your criticisms of the Consolidated Supervision Entity program. But I guess my question goes to, what did the SEC have the authority to do and not do? As I read the language, it would appear that, number one, I'm reading from Title 17, Chapter 2, Part 240, that the Commission can impose additional conditions on a broker-dealer, including restricting the broker-dealer's business on a product-specific, category-specific, or general basis. Two, submitting to the Commission a plan to increase the broker-dealer's net capital. And if the Commission finds it necessary or appropriate, it may impose, quote, additional conditions on the broker-dealer or the ultimate holding company. I know that Chairman Cox had previously testified before the Senate Banking Committee that, quote, the SEC had authority to monitor for and act quickly in response to financial or operational weaknesses in a CSE holding company or its unregulated affiliates that might place regulated entities or the broader financial system at risk. I think that the General Counsel has said similar words, as did the Deputy Director of Division of Market Regulation of the SEC in testimony before this committee. Is it not true that under this program that the SEC did have the authority to have caused Lehman to add additional capital?
Congressman, my understanding is, and I wasn't there at the time, obviously, when the CSE program was in effect, the voluntary nature of the program related to the regulation and the supervision of the holding company and the affiliates of the broker-dealers. The SEC does, as you point out, have broad and comprehensive authority with respect to the regulation of U.S. broker-dealers.
So I'm not sure if that answered the question or not. Under this voluntary program, I admit it was voluntary, could the SEC have required Lehman to post additional capital?
With respect to the broker-dealer, I believe they could have. With respect to the holding company, that's a question that I don't think we really know the answer to. My view would be that we could have pushed the limits of our authority in this program much more than we did, that because while the program was voluntary, leaving the program meant being regulated by another regulator, in this case likely a European regulator. So we had more leverage over these firms than perhaps the staff thought they were free to exercise.
Well, I think that's an important point, because as a practical matter, what would have happened had Lehman chose to pick up their toys and go home? Ultimately, that sends a very strong signal to the market, or as you put it, in all probability, the EU would have provided a regulator for them. Okay, so you say that certainly you could have required more capital at the dealer-broker level. How about the disclosure as far as what was posted into their liquidity pool and what was actually there? And at what point does the SEC not just have the authority to direct Lehman, say, to properly disclose, but to tell the public?
My understanding is that with respect to the liquidity pool encumbrances, that the staff knew of some, did not know of others. With respect to the ones they knew about and knew about in a timely way, they directed Lehman to remove some of them from the liquidity pool for purposes of the Prudential Oversight Program. There was not communication to Lehman that they needed to recalculate or provide new disclosure with respect to the public of what their liquidity pool assets were and whether the number had been changed by the removal of some assets.
And is the same true of Repo 105? Could you have required?
Let me just explain